Dad, I'm sure Ezra's going to be curious. What was your favorite meal as a child?
Before I answer that question, I'd like to talk about what things cost when I was growing up, because there's quite a bit of difference between when I grew up in the 50s and 60s to 2024. And that's where we are today, Ezra. It's Wednesday, 24 April, 2024. And prices are out of the roof. I can't imagine what they're going to be like when you grow up. But as I grew up, a single dollar had a lot of buying power throughout most of the 60s. The national average price for most groceries in the 60s was less than a dollar. A 5 pound bag of flour, for example, was 61 cents. A dozen of eggs cost 66 cents. A pound of ground beef, which we always refer to it as hamburger, was 55 cents. And a box of cornflakes was 32 cents. So back in those days, you didn't get paid as much money either. I should have thrown a loaf of bread in there. A loaf of bread was about 10 cents. Now it's three, four, $5, depending on what kind of bread you buy. So if I could only eat one food for the rest of my life, I would choose pizza and chicken. Just recently, this month, while we were watching you, Ezra, and you were 3 years old, it seemed you'd had a healthy appetite for chicken and pizza, especially chicken, leading me to think that you, as Yoda would say, and I hope you know who Yoda is, your DNA is strong with the Vector gene. That it is.
Then the other question I think Ezra would be interested to know is what subject did you like best in school and why?
Mm, yeah, I can narrow it down to one, but I had three favorites: history, English, and music were my most liked subjects. I did well in math. Math was fairly simple because math is math. English was tough. I liked it, um, but I always had problems with dangling participles. Probably by the time that you grow up, Ezra, no one will know what a dangling participle is. But to directly answer the question, history was my favorite subject. And so, why is that important? Well, as I see it, learning about the past provides us with important information about our country, our heritage, the world we live in, and the human race as a whole. If I remember correctly, when I was in seventh grade, I always took history seriously during my early school days. And I became really engrossed in it and started reading history books by various artists at a real early age. Strangely enough, I continued to develop an odd liking for history and attempted to study as many historical books during my high school years, which was a bit surprising to me because most of my classmates at the time seemed to find history boring. Even now, as I see people in our society in 2024, history doesn't seem to be very popular among students. They're more into computers and video games and that sort of stuff. But um, by studying history, I learned about the ancient worlds, how social and economical situations were at the time, and how events throughout history influenced the direction of man. Luckily, I had the chance to apply what I learned from my history textbooks as I toured all over the world during my military career. I've been in, oh, I can't even remember how many countries, but I was in Europe and I was in Asia, as well as the United States, because there's a lot of um, um, things here in the United States that relate to history. And by the time you go to school, I heard a joke one time where they were talking about remembering presidents, and a little boy, um, the father asked the little boy who was the 13th president, and the little boy didn't know, and he replied back to the father, uh, "Do you know the presidents?" And the father just repeated it out. He said, "Well, during my time, there's been 12 more presidents. So it was easier for you to remember three or four. So that was kind of funny. But anyway, luckily I had that chance to tour all over the world during my military career and see some of the things that I saw in history books. The most compelling thing that I think that I will never forget is Hiroshima in Japan, where we dropped the atomic bomb. And that atomic bomb dropped at ground center. It was right over this building, and your father was there. We went and saw some of the things that happened there. They have a museum. In fact, your father, I had to kind of pull him along because he had these headsets. He listened to everything that was being said. If I had let him do that, we would have been there for probably 2 or 3 days. But that building really fascinated me because in my history book, that building was a page. It was almost a full page. And it talked about how we dropped the bomb and all that sort of stuff. Hi, Ezra. Um, and I stood at that building maybe, I don't know, 30 minutes. It seemed like it was just a couple minutes, but I was so fascinated with the picture I remembered from my childhood to being standing right in front of that picture. The Roman Colosseum was another one that really kind of took me back, remembering the things that I saw in my history book. Yes, Ezra. Yes. um, but it was quite an experience to visualize some of these things in the book. It just took me right back to my childhood days as I stood there looking at it. So hopefully, during your life, Ezra, you'll enjoy history as much as I have. Just remember that history exists so we can learn from it. History is the story of who we are, where we came from, and potentially reveal where you're headed. So, with that being said, Ezra, this podcast is now history. Bye. Bye, Ezra.